I'll start by saying good afternoon. It is afternoon where I am, but good evening for those who might be overseas. I'm your host, Lance J. Brown, the president of the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this event, our second event in our second year of the series of discussions with thought leaders around the world on our progress towards greater, greener cities for all and regions for all. Our guests today, Michael van Drescha and Alexander de Hoga and Nadia Nelina, are coming to us from the Low Countries and will be sharing their expertise, research, initiatives, and experience in urban design and infrastructural design, policy, and planning. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our program and to introduce today's moderator, Nadia. For those attending who want AIA continuing education credits, please do be sure to stay for 45 minutes and then use the learning objectives in the invitation and feel free to self-report one learning unit to the AIA. For those joining us for the first time, the organizer of this series, the CSU, is devoted to building bridges between the United Nations and civil society, the design professions, business, academia, and allied organizations. The CSU mission ranges from increasing awareness about emerging issues, facilitating knowledge transfer between and among policy and decision makers, and fostering connections, cooperation, and collaboration, while all the time promoting the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals, especially Goal 11, which deals with building communities and cities in the physical environment, along with the new urban agenda adopted at Habitat 3 in Quito, and a particular initiative supported by Mamounia Sharif, the executive director of UN Habitat. In the spirit of collaboration, I want to make sure we thank all of today's program partners. They are the UN Habitat Office in New York, the AIA New York Chapter, the UN Habitat Professional Forum, the NGO Committee on Sustainable Development, New York, the Columbia University Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, and Public Space, CEL, the Creative Exchange Lab, and our most recent partner, Global Urban Development. I invite everyone to visit the CSU website and register for our upcoming May 5th Green Cities event with Yasemin Afakan speaking from Turkey about the progressive city of Eskişehir, and for our 2022 flagship program, our partnership program, the major one with the UN, Climate Change and the Role of Cities, on May 18th from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Eastern Time. And please also see the website for our resources, previous newsletters, publications. It's now my pleasure to introduce Nadia Nelina, the moderator of today's program. Nadia is an urban planner with a background in architecture, social sciences, city design, and development. She's a graduate of MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology in Boston, and she has been practicing in Europe since 2006. Her projects include master plans for citywide preservation and regeneration, as well as other projects focusing on the quality and the design of physical environment. She's a very valuable colleague. She's a very dear friend. We're very pleased to have her moderate today's Green Cities program. Over to you, Nadia. One last thing for, again, late joiners, audio off, please. Images on, please. And during the course of the session, should you have questions, please submit them through the chat function on the Zoom. Thanks very much. Looking forward to a good session. Over to you, Nadia.
Thank you, Lance, and thank you, Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization, for this generous invitation. It is fantastic to see everyone. Please do keep your screens on. Hi, Maxine. I see some very old friends. It's really great to see everyone. Welcome. Allow me to introduce the two speakers today. We are coming to you from Belgium and Rotterdam, the Netherlands. And today we have Michiel van Drescha and Alexander de Hoga. Michiel is the founder, one of 3 partners at Felix Landscape Architects and Urban Planners. Michiel is a landscape architect. He has a strong focus on environmental challenges and specializes in strategic planning. He does a lot of spatial research and large-scale investigation. One of his recent projects is the Catalog of Nature-Based Solutions, completed for the World Bank with a number of partners. Michiel will be one of the speakers, and he will refer to the Catalog of Nature-Based Solutions, which is also available for download. I will put the download link in the chat for everyone. Alexander de Hoga is a former tenured professor at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He is a founder of ORG, Organization for Permanent Modernity. He was in charge, or is continuing to be in charge, of the capping of the ring in Antwerp. It's one of the biggest projects in Europe today. He also focuses on strategic master plans with a strong focus on resilience. And also with us today is Kobe Rosenberg. Kobe, hi. Kobe will be with us to answer any questions on behalf of Organization for Permanent Modernity. And with that, I think we will proceed to the presentations to save time for questions and answers at the end.
There is no audio.
There's no audio.
Does anybody else not have audio?
Yes, no audio.
No audio.
No audio.
Could hear you guys, but nobody else. Hello, everybody from the Arsenal.
All right, yeah. We're obviously having a problem with the audio. Nadia, do you want?
Okay, I'm gonna. Is there a sound now?
Yes.
Oh. Yes.
Yes, there's sound, and also Kamu Kanjala has I think that has a TV on or something. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna try one more time to start with the sound. sound now?
From you, yes.
Yes?
Yes.
No, not of the recording, not yet.
Oh, right, not of the recording, no.
Nadia, when you share the screen, you need to go to advanced to get video on.
Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. Irene, you were saying?
When you click on share, then you have to go to advanced and then to video.
Okay, I'm gonna try once again.
You have to click on advanced and then you will see the video icon.
Presentations
Okay.
today, and start with.
I think what's
And now?
interesting about the Low Countries in the Netherlands is
Does it work
well, in
now?
the framework
Yes.
of what we
Yes.
are discussing today, nature-based solutions, is that the Netherlands are actually located at a place which is contra-natural, you would say, is below the water level of the sea. So implementing nature-based solutions is quite a challenge here because you cannot go back to the natural conditions because then you would have to flood the entire area again. But these are actually conditions that we will be facing in more cities and countries over the world when sea level keeps kind of increasing. So this kind of complicated relationship with the initial natural conditions, that's something which is a context and a situation and a state of being, let's say, that is very representative for the future of many places worldwide. And that's also why we have worked partly together with the World Bank and a team of advisors on the catalog for nature-based solutions, which I would be happy to kind of show and share a few things also together with Alexander in this talk. But let me first start with well, introducing why we wanted to work on this catalog for nature-based solutions. And that's because we actually believe that landscape architecture has a key role in shaping the cities of the future. Because the biggest challenge that we are facing today is to realign nature and humankind. And organizing that specific relationship, that's exactly what landscape architects do. And we see that our profession changed over time because in the past and in history, landscape architecture was about turning nature into cultivated landscapes. But at the moment, actually, our profession is about turning cultivated landscapes into natural grounds. And that's why we think that landscape architecture is instrumental in dealing with the challenges of today. And well, what are we actually, why is that so important and so crucial at the moment? Is because we are confronted with a series of challenges at the moment. The raising of the seawater level, the land subsidence, longer droughts, and the agricultural problems and fires connected to that. But also heavy rains and the floods, decrease of biodiversity. And these challenges, they might have happened separately in the past, allowing us to solve them with one-purpose infrastructures. So we protected ourselves against the water of the sea with seawalls. We have built more and more windmills to pump up the water to make the land still dry, even when it was kind of declining. We built water basins to irrigate the land during the droughts. We built dikes along the rivers, and we created actually even more nature reserves to increase the biodiversity. But now all these challenges, they are actually coming together in our living environment, happening at the same time. So instead of one-dimensional infrastructures to solve these separate problems, we need to create multifunctional environments that address several of these tasks at the same time. And we questioned ourselves, like, how does it actually look, that other way of addressing them, this multifunctional way? And all the major challenges, the spatial challenges that we are facing, they result from our attempts to control nature. And we can continue to increase that fight, building higher dikes, bigger pumps, larger nature reserves. But it's becoming more and more clear that that's a race that we cannot win. So instead we should and could choose for a paradigm shift. So from fighting against nature towards working with nature and reversing our violent relationship with nature into a partnership that would actually solve several of our major challenges in one go. And these strategies and measures that are based on that renewed relationship, that's actually what we call nature-based solutions. And they are the base for the multifunctional environments that we actually need. As said, during the past year, we have worked together with the World Bank, Nederland Schuurman, UN Studio, the Rebel Group, and UN Sense on the catalog for nature-based solutions. And this catalog creates a tool for policymakers and governmental organizations to understand what nature-based solutions can do in their city. And that enables an easier process to allocate investments on nature-based solutions. And nature-based solutions can be organized into three categories. The first category is to protect the existing natural qualities in cities, such as these mangroves. The second is to restore or to build back the natural qualities which are gone or which are kind of devastated. And the third one is to build up new natural landscapes in cities, such as these urban farms, as you can see on the right. The catalog brings hierarchy in these three levels of nature-based solutions, putting the protection of the existing natural qualities as the first one, and then the enhancement of the restoration of the degraded ones as the second, and the creation of new nature-based solutions as the third one to support the other two. And kind of bringing that hierarchy allows us to reconnect cities again with the natural system that they're part of, because we make the existing natural qualities the most important one. And this is very important because with the great infrastructure that we have applied in the past decades, we have actually been quite successful in detaching our cities from the natural context that they're part of, with dams, dikes, and air conditionings. Cities became more and more generic and less connected to the natural systems that they are part of, and as such also less unique. And reconnecting cities again with the natural system they're part of makes it possible to kind of embed them again. And the third thing I would like to tell about nature-based solutions is the scale of implementing them, because to be able to reconnect cities with the natural system that they're part of, it's important that we do not see nature-based solutions just as single statements, not greening the gray, but they need to be really implemented into a new urban landscape, which is reconnecting a city on a river basin scale to the landscape system that it's part of. It's also kind of making an integrated network on the city scale of all the public spaces and the landscapes within an urban environment. And on a neighborhood scale, making sure that there is a new connection between the built and the non-built environment. And what we can see there is that infrastructure gets totally and a completely new role in the urban environment by applying nature-based solutions, because it's not just the infrastructure to organize the logistics and the different streams. It's really the place where the urban environment and the natural surroundings can be merged again. I would like to give the word to Alexander to hear more about the role of infrastructure in the urban environment. I think he can also add to that.
Alexander, I understand that you will continue talking about infrastructure. So perhaps you can tell us a bit about how infrastructure is contributing to resilience on a larger scale.
Hi, good afternoon, Nadia, and thank you, Michiel, for this excellent presentation. And good afternoon to all of you on this beautiful spring day in New York City. I will attempt to answer your question by also sharing a few slides. So Just a word about the Antwerp project. This is a reconfiguration of a highway that's been running through the city for about 45 years. And it is the single largest investment and the most complicated infrastructure investment in Europe today. The current budgeting of works approved is about 5 billion, and there is another 5 billion under preparation in the pipeline. So the scale is just vast, but frankly, because of its urban setting in a densely built city, surrounded by the second biggest port of Europe, the complexity and is also really excruciating, I should say. So just a word before we really get into this project on background on our method and approach. So we're an organization based in Brussels and in New York City, in Brooklyn, with work in design, infrastructure design, and especially systemic integration. So when we are approached to handle or help work on an infrastructure project, we attempt to help reframe the question as one of integrated development. So it's not just the infrastructure, but the infrastructure is an opportunity to start rethinking and rewiring a broader set of environmental indicators, including very much the work that Michiel was describing, landscape and ecology. So the infrastructure project may start as a mobility project or an energy investment, but it quickly turns into a much broader integrated question along the lines of the topics you see mentioned on this slide. So the aim is to always turn an initial investment for a specific investor or client into a transformative integrated project, which helps with two things. The positive impacts, the list of benefits increases dramatically, and the fail risk on the project is reduced, because by doing an integrated approach, you help also bring on board stakeholders that often bring knowledge and insight about the potential negative side effects of an investment. And they actually make the project better and smarter. But it's not so easy to always do this with the least amount of friction possible. So in order to do this, we have to look at why infrastructure projects fail, and they often do. So about 2/3 of big infrastructure investments planned globally fail either due to delays or just being scrapped altogether with huge cost overruns. Nevertheless, these projects can be, if done integratedly, hooks to really help us manage our big collective common risks. What you see here is a dashboard from the Davos World Economic Forum in 2016 with the likelihood and the impact of big risks, societal risks that we face together. And I just listed in yellow the ones that integrated infrastructure approach can really help mitigate or resolve. So why, if these are so urgently needed from a resiliency point of view to help mitigate and absorb risk that we face, why do they fail? The most often common reason is because we have our field has well taken care of financial and engineering obstacles. Those we can quantify, we can manage, but the spatial obstacles, including the environmental ones, and the social obstacles are the reason why it often fails, because we lack, apparently, a way to read these, to have filters on our glasses that block these or that allow for these. Well, let's say they often are not properly accounted for. So our approach is very purposefully trying to offer a workaround. So we work always with 4 lines in parallel. Obviously, design and planning, urban design, urban planning is critical. It's in itself an integrative venture, so it's critical. But we like to tie to it coalition building and process management. So working with the stakeholders from the get-go, including and especially the opponents of a project, because often they have particular reasons to be against it, and those could be good reasons. So we need to know these and work with them. But then also what you see on the left, advanced spatial analytics, this basically means 2 things. It's a thorough and good mapping and having good databases, but also it means the capacity to do rapid quantitative evaluations on design proposals. So we need to run numbers on rudimentary ideas to assess early on what the likelihood is that this is a valid path for a potential solution. So we have a few algorithm writers that do nothing but basically design specific context, specific trade-offs for specific project briefs. And then the fourth pillar here, storytelling. Of course, in a great project, you build a common narrative, a narrative you craft together with the stakeholders and with the investors and with public government. And that is a narrative where everybody can be a hero and everybody can share and participate and be an actor in that story. So storytelling is huge. In a sense, a big project can succeed if you have a great story. If you don't have it, you'll never get it. So it's a pillar together with the other three. So that's the integrated approach as far as we can, as far as we see and the way we work on it. So what that brings with itself in the method is joint fact-finding, a lot of work in groups. Nobody is smart enough to capture all the different knowledge bases for integrated development, using space, with the diagram on your right, as a generous medium, as opposed to Excel files or Word files where you can nitpick on details. Space can be multi-layered and can be an expanding pie of opportunity. And finally, very big and very important, we look at the design as a social contract between the stakeholders, between government, investors, and private entities, and of course, civic action committees, sign a covenant together. That is the blueprint of the big project. So it's not a technical blueprint, and that's a mistake we always make. It's especially a social contract, and that needs to be written. We use also all sorts of tools for this, including game theory, but I may get back to this. So I'll wrap it up here for a general introduction. Nadia, I don't know if you have additional questions.
So it seems like to de-risk the project, what you do is you create consensus before you start the actual design process. Did I get that correctly?
Yes and no. I mean, we really use the design process to generate that almost consensus or almost consensus. 100% agreement is you wouldn't want to live in a society where everybody agrees, but we can get to 80%, let's say, and that's a huge success. So yeah, and so the difficulty in getting consensus is not just speaking to people and especially listening to them, but it's also a question of managing the knowledge bases. So let me just give you an example. This is already about Antwerp, like the situation as it was when we came in. So you see here on the left, a partial aerial map with in white, 2 indications of, you see a ring road here, which has not been closed or completed. And so various discussions were still ongoing after 20 years of already preparing the project about where the missing piece of highway ought to be located. So that's one discussion we were facing. Another discussion was there was a plebiscite, there was a referendum, in fact, different ones, about the location and about the project. So there was a lot of public debate and public discussion, public discourse. And then there were action committees that brought completely alternative or additional propositions. For instance, let's build a roof over the entire ring around Antwerp and make a massive park over it. Now, if you were to simply analyze the knowledge field, so the disciplines for which you need a degree or a PhD or whatever, to manage this question, we're facing, as you can see here, the list of degrees, about 15 or more. So that in itself, I mean, the stakeholders are an issue, but managing the knowledge landscape and getting those languages from these different fields to talk to each other. Flow in urban design means something else from flow in tunnel safety means something else from flow in ecology. So the vocabularies are simply different. Those need to be reconnected for the conversation to be able to start. So that's I'll leave it at that for an answer.
And Michiel, in your work, I understand that, I know we work globally, but also the particular project that demonstrate urban application of NBS, of nature-based solutions, the plan for Groningen. What was the role of the public there?
There was the role of the public was quite was very important. It was actually the public was consulted in several series because with Groningen, I'll explain the project later on. The goal was actually to show and to develop a guideline and a manual of how nature-based solutions, but also other social goals could be implemented in the public space. And that actually was done through a various series with local stakeholders to involve them in that process. Because it also had to do with the shift from mobility towards an urban environment, which was meant for kind of human living. So if you, there were some mobility choices that had to create the possibilities for improvement of the public space. So we had to show the pros and cons in that discussion. So that's also why we really involved the public into this debate, so that they could see that sacrificing parking spots kind of creates opportunities for nature and social spaces in the city. So I think it's crucial indeed to kind of raise awareness as well with the project, so that it's that it doesn't become a kind of academic inventarization and then a kind of a vision which is very long term, but that people can see how they can actually contribute to it themselves.
And Alexander, in the list that I just read, where are the process managers? Is that a separate profession, or were you the process manager? How did it go? I'm dying to hear more about how this project actually went on.
Sure. Well, we had a role both in the process management. I mean, I was appointed as the curator for this project. Let's say the superintendent for the project. But I can speak a bit more about this role. Maybe I'll pass through a few slides and that will conclude the segment for me. But so the first thing we needed to do is let me take a step back here, Nadia. Yes, process management, but also content. I mean, I feel that it's actually really important because of the knowledge fields that are so intricately intertwined. And there's such a huge translation job. You actually need to be knowledgeable. And so with a background as an urban designer and an architect and a civil engineer, it helped to be able to translate some of these issues into other fields or listen to other experts. As you see here a field on the right of a pie with 7 pieces of different fields or disciplines. We just simply try to identify within Flanders or even the Low Countries which are the best experts in every field, and then bring them into the conversation so that whatever knowledge was available would be harvested to get the best outcome for the project. So that then in itself, it takes a bit of work. So staging that, this is just the first year of the amount of about 200 work sessions with various players to actually extract the knowledge, to have the translation issues resolved, to bring people in. This is a schedule of 1 week of work where this is all in Dutch, but you have a session about mobility, you have a session about ecology, a session about civil technical, structural issues, and a session about tunnel safety. This is 1 week where about a few hundred people had to interact and interrelate and study and respond, almost a sort of a peer review process throughout different fields of inquiry. The goal is always this, to come out with the best possible project. And so with the best goal for sustainable development and the best goal for your stated mobility purpose, which was the point of departure for the project to even begin the highway completion. But then running rapid quantitative analysis is key. I mean, design is key. And that's something we did in a lot of the cases, was some of the pre-designs for most of the things. But so many other important important people and scientists did the quantitative checks. So this is just for NOx, so air pollution with a metric of NOx. While you do this, you need to publish books, which were distributed on the kind of a few thousand copies to all the people that participate and beyond. Exhibitions where I just want to focus on the interactivity of the work. So you see here in these kind of blue-green shirts, people standing there. So these are people that collect inputs from the visitors and that help translate plans that are always hard to read for laymen and make it an interactive exhibit that is also pedagogical in nature. So I can conclude with this. The working method that we settled on here was this simple diagram with people with 3 colors, heads, blue, yellow, and orange. Let's say one color represents the civil administrators and the civil servants engaged with the project. The second color represents citizens. So we really have citizens in the middle of the process, active citizens that want to and can spend time on this. So it adds a measure of transparency to everything. And then third color are external experts, which are either appointed through the government or through an investor or through a citizen action committee. So the experts can come from various corners. If there's a trust issue, you can always appoint your own expert. So that's how we do the collaboration. So we are in a sense external experts, but we do the process and supply a number of our own people on these working tables. The idea is here you work until you have near agreement, and you get much more out of this process than if you go to court and end up stalling everything and get nothing. Not a bad project, but also no progress in general and no resiliency gains. So that's what that looks like in practice. This is one of the sessions. So there's a model on the table, there's drawings on the wall, there's calculations. Half of these people are experts, half are citizens, and you work it through. I already mentioned the exhibitions. And this is, I'll conclude with this slide, which is I think really significant and also a first, at least for Belgium, a covenant which was agreed between the national government, the mayor of Antwerp and the city of Antwerp, and the three most important civic action committees of the area. So you see them sitting here all next to each other, and they sign a covenant for the future of the region, where they agree on a multi-point plan for transformation in a generational project. They all got a ring as a testimony. There's nothing legal about this document, but it's a commitment endorsed with a silver ring made in the beautiful Antwerp Diamond District. And that's the covenant. 12 signatories, and 5 years later, a week ago, we had a recommitment of all parties to the covenant and a commitment of additional funding to continue the collaboration. I won't go into the details about the covenant, that's not the place here, but you see here, I love this photo, you have our Minister President of 2016 holding the ring, and behind him, the leader of the most significant civic action committee holding the same ring. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. This seems like a real success story, or I'm sure a lot went on behind the scenes in terms of making sure the process moves forward. It seems like there's really a lot of work that went into making this happen. But I understand the project is under construction, right?
Yes. Well, there's work. Absolutely, there's work around the entire ring. Some segments have almost been completed, so that's really good news. Corona strangely allowed doing the works faster because there was less traffic on the road.
Ah.
So that part should be completed by 2024. Other parts have been permitted, not under preparation, and then other parts are still in the pre-permitting and environmental impact analysis phase.
Mm. Well, terrific. I'm enjoying how you both talk about infrastructure at very different scales. Michiel, maybe you can continue with Groningen and shift the scale from this, the largest infrastructure project in Europe. Did I get that correct, Alexander?
That's right. That's right. Yep.
Okay. To something that actually happens in a rather quaint old European city of Groningen.
Yeah, thanks. No, I think it's quite nice to see that Alexander talks about implementation of this nature-based environments through grant projects in the city. What we have been working on during the past year is actually the other way around. I would say we have worked together with the municipality of Groningen on a public space manual of how we can do with little steps the implementation of a different environment in the city. And maybe I start with first showing where actually Groningen is located, because probably most of people know where Antwerp is, but Groningen is slightly smaller. It's actually located in the north of the Netherlands. It's the most north city you can go to over here. And actually it's a city which is known as a pioneer for traffic circulation planning. It was one of the first cities that changed their mobility scheme in the center. Also one of the first cities who made a bicycle traffic plan in the 70s. And actually at the moment there is a very kind of, ambitious political power in the city who wants to push this even further and develop new guidelines for an urban environment which actually contributes to the living quality of the inhabitants of the city. And during the past years, the city has worked on a new municipal plan. It's called the Next City, where actually pretty much all the big agendas of the city are organized. So the new housing areas, new industrial areas, mobility transitions, new corridors. Actually, all these different systems are integrated into this policy planning. So you could say with a Dutch painting that actually all the different functions and zones are positioned. So it's about time actually now to think about actually what's in between all these different functions in these fields. So moving from composition 2 to the Victoria Boogie Woogie from Piet Mondrian, that's actually what we saw as our task. And looking at the public space, which is actually gluing all these different functional zones together, it also gives us room to reflect on what actually public space is and was. So it was an area of experience in the past, becoming more and more an area of movement and circulation during the past decades, to the extent that at the moment public spaces and streets are actually dominated by mobility, and pretty much there is no space left for anything else. So you could say that, well, streets were serving various agendas in the past. There was a dominant one that kind of developed to become the only principle for the design of the streets in the city at the moment. And that also reflects on actually how cities are kind of represented, and that actually that the streets are currently the connectors between the different destinations in the city, connected by cars, maybe bikes, and also by pedestrians. And that's also why this is actually probably the most important, at least to us, framework plan, which is part of the policy plan of Groningen. It's called the proximity map, which actually the aim was to organize all the different services and facilities in the city for each inhabitant within a range of 15 minutes walk, which allowed you to kind of move around in the city and get all things done without the need of a car. So that enabled us to move away from an infrastructural city, which is kind of the connection between destinations, towards an experiential city where these lines in between also become like spaces to be and to stay. So we could move away from a city which was organized based on infrastructure towards a city which is organized based on the human experience. So we could, and by doing that, by pushing out or kind of taking out the cars, actually a lot of space was revealed to kind of all the infrastructure which is now organized below ground for water and all kind of other things could suddenly be kind of brought up and kind of be daylighted to be turned into landscapes that in return could contribute to the biodiversity, the ecological performance, the water management and the urban climate. And in the next step would be places for social activity, economic development.
Marco, on the green cities.
That's actually not something new, because that's something which was done in the past in the Netherlands. We called it the kind of the historical canals, which were transportation. There were places to be, there were infrastructure to kind of drive around, and there were the places also where new houses and functions were organized along them. So basically what we did is that we tried to imagine what would a city look like if you would not only have the canals as these landscapes, but pretty much every street in the city would look like or would be designed with the principle of canal. So that's how we kind of developed this manual. So we actually reversed also the order of how you normally work on a design guide. normally you work on a macro scale, you kind of connect the dots, then you have the meso scale where you organize the neighborhoods, then in the end you have the street sections, which are the result of that. We started with the street scale because that's the scale where the human scale is the most present. From that street principles, we built street networks to in the end come up with the networks on the city scale. And to instrumentalize that, we called it that we move from one-dimensional streets towards 10-dimensional streets, so that we made sure that actually mobility is not the only driving force behind the design decisions that are made, but all the other agendas, these 10 agendas of the streets are. So a street is not only mobility, but the street needs to be accessible for everyone, and the street needs to be safe. A street needs to create an experience for the people who are walking through it. It needs to be a healthy environment for their users. It needs to be public, accessible, and to be able to be used by the inhabitants of the city. It needs to have balanced mobility, so accessibility for cars and logistics is still very important. And the street needs to be an ecosystem, so green and planting and other ecological assets need to be integrated in the design to make it also climate adaptive, so that streets also contribute to the climate mitigation in the city. The street needs to create value, so economic value for the functions along it. And the last one, but not the least one, is that it needs to create identity, because streets designed based on mobility became very generic because they had to serve cars that had to be able to drive through and park along it. So actually that same principle is applied all over the world. So every street is actually based on the same design principles, and moving away from that, making 10 principles the base for the design of the streets also creates the opportunity to make them unique and give them a specific identity. So what we did is that we showed how a street could transform from at the moment where car mobility is still the dominant factor towards a near future where we kind of try to rebalance these different agendas towards in the end where they're all kind of equalized. And we did that into sections for now, soon, and later. So this is how a current street in Groningen looks like, where you can see that all these 10 dimensions are shown, and the mobility is the by far most dominant one towards the near future, where we start to balance all these other agendas, and in the end, they're all equalized. We did that for several cities in the city, several streets in the city, I'm sorry. And actually, it's important to say that within these 10 agendas, all the different policy agendas from the different departments of the city are integrated. So not only the traffic people, but also the economic, the social, the cultural agendas are all realized in these different dimensions. And through these guidelines and through this manual, we show how the redesign of the streets can contribute to the realization of them. So these are the different streets that we have all done. So in the end, we have done that for 14 representative cities of the city. So actually, we have tools for to redesign every street in the city. And it's not only important that we give them guidelines and to redesign the streets. It's also important that these streets, that they create networks for people to move in a safe way through the city. So we looked at 6 representative neighborhoods where we actually merged, we created frameworks. So these are actually the current situation frameworks and alternative organizations for these neighborhoods, where we again did the same thing. We maximized these 10 agendas. We grouped these 10 dimensions into 4 schemes. So the first is the green and blue one, where we merge ecology and climate adaptation. The mobility framework, where we merge mobility, safety, and accessibility. The social one, where health, social cohesion, and economy are combined. And the experiential framework, where experience and identity are connected. And that actually allowed us to, well, so again, talk with inhabitants, talk with different stakeholders, see what is the importance to come to an alternative organization of a neighborhood, not only based on mobility, but based on all these different values. Again, we did that for 6 neighborhoods. And the last part is that we showed also to the municipality what that renewed focus could mean for their city. So how, if they would call big projects, not as big as the one that Alexander just showed, but big city scale projects, if they would launch them and use them as well to realize these 10 ambitions, what would that mean? So we looked at a school campus in the city that currently looks like this. If you try to realize all these 10 dimensions in that project, how could that be transferred into a green campus next to a sports area where the swimming pool is also open to this green landscape? But also we looked at a main entrance to a new kind of big extension area of the city, which is currently a traffic lot, which is a filled canal. So if we would open that up, making it a neighborhood park, being an inviting entrance to the city. And as well, we looked at the main city entrance, so the station, which is currently actually a real traffic hotspot in the city, moving away all the different bike infrastructures to the other side of the station, integrating them into the park, how we could turn that into a green entrance for the city, connected to the canal, connected to the museum, so that this really becomes a green entrance to the city. This manual is accepted by the municipality. And actually the interesting part is that it's currently used for all the different transformation projects in the city, and allowing also people to question all these projects if they actually comply to realizing these 10 dimensions. So not only if a renewal of a street, if it actually fits in the traffic scheme of the city and the mobility strategy, but if it also kind of contributes to creating more green spaces or realizing social agendas. And that's actually what this new manual allows. And I think that's quite a big step forward, which is interesting to see how that will unfold during the coming years.
Michiel, thank you for sharing the story of Groningen. This is really interesting how something so incremental can be so impactful. I mean, I think that we now see that there's really a lot of actual similarities between a very large, ambitious, one of the most expensive projects in Europe and this very gentle, kind of attentive way of transforming the cities. I think they're both very transformative. Let's get back to the large-scale project. Alexander, can you tell us more about what is happening with Antwerp?
Sure, Nadia, and thank you, Michiel. That was really terrific. I'll just share a few more slides about the actual issues relating to the design and how you manage to guarantee quality throughout all of this. So, I mean, I have to say one of the things that, certainly from our perspective, is that for all the players to get to this integrated development, it requires a little bit of giving up control. You can't control everything. You can curate. I mean, and certainly we can, and everybody can impact and transform the project, but nobody has full control. That's unavoidable in a democracy with strong with a strong civic society. But so one of the ways we manage the integration over the whole thing with these various inputs is the master plan. So in our case, we do have a very specific master plan, which engages a bold dream about really building a roof over most of the highway. And I was thinking of Michiel's images at the conclusion of his presentation. You need those images. People need to be able to dream big if you want to mobilize, if you want to be able to mobilize them with all their disagreements mutually to move ahead together with the project. So the master plan for us has that function and all the beautiful images that come forth from it. So it's an integrated master plan between ecology and nature, between mobility, making city, and let's say the cultural dimension, the experiential dimension, civil life. And so that integration, we update this once a year for the entire city region to keep integration. And so parts are under construction, parts are permitted and ground is being prepared on locally, parts are in the environmental impact analysis. Parts are in the think tank. So 5 billion committed, 5 million left to go. Important here is to maintain always an insight that, in a democracy with a vibrant civic society, there is never agreement about anything. So people need to realize that power is not absolute somewhere and hidden. And so to help dismantle paranoia, we use game theory to help people give insight in how distributed power actually is in our world, in our urban world, in our cities. Those things you have to keep in the back of your mind, because I'll show you now a set of specific cases, specific designs that we've been engaging in. And one of but the method is always the same. One thing is, it's one thing to work on a highway, but of course, if one of the ambitions is to realize a modal shift of 50%, which means 50% of all movements in the area would be not done by private vehicle. That's a very bold ambition in a car-based society, but it means you have to, of course, invest in things that are not highways. So you see here 4 locations along the ring, which are locations for multimodal hubs, of which 2 have been fully designed and 2 are in the waiting room. Multimodal hubs, this is one of them, it's in Belgium. The current situation with the highway in the middle, and you see up left the train station. The thing with the multimodal hub is it's not just trains, it's all the other modes that need to connect effortlessly to the train. Bikes, trams, subways, buses, DRTs, and contemporary means of new business models of mobility. So we use here the roof over the highway as a means to help organize it. This is a pre-design, a feasibility, one of several, which is currently being worked on with the various transit companies to come to a final conclusion in order to realize this hub, which would effectively, you see it's a mixture of really design and sketch design, but also calculations in order to achieve this. Then another layer has to do with the various big landscapes that emerge. The ring on the level of the highway underground isn't singular figure, it's always the same highway. Above ground in the city, it is truly a sequence of different metropolitan parks, indicated here with different colors. I want to show you one example. This is called Lobroek Dock. You see here a canal and a leftover dock area. This was the initial proposal for the highway, to basically run in the middle and destroy a lot of the land surrounding it. This is the situation when we came in. And so then through a series of iterations, it got changed from this to this. So a much more compacted and managed, let's say, highway design. And then we pushed it another level, so to add more roofs, and so to actually make it disappear altogether. So that's the situation, which is still possible, but not, the money hasn't been assigned to fully complete the enclosure. But you see, this is the highway in Antwerp connecting the biggest port to its hinterland. Where is the highway, right? It's gone. And that's what it would look like. So then after we had this pre-design, we passed it on for all the segments to separate designers. In this case, it was a team of Paula Vigano, Seki Vigano, who did a design, and they actually went more radical within the technical constraints and project definition that we had built. And they really proposed to go to a completely watered area. So parts of the roof over the highway will also become shallow water to actually integrate all the water systems in the area into one overall huge basin of 1 mile by 2/3 of a mile. So it would be a vast water figure with a little hole for the highway left in the middle. Another important area of attention for us is the various civic spaces. You see here about 9 to 10 civic spaces along the ring, where you could have major functions like, cultural centers, temples, areas of recreation, etc. An interesting space is the Saturn Connector, which is designed like this currently, and which we redesigned like that, which basically means a reduction of 2/3 of the space taken by infrastructure. So you see the new highway design creates an enormous amount of green space that can be taken for either parks, resilient functionalities, or even some city making. So that's the redo. So we go from this to that, whilst also increasing the connectivity actually on all levels, even for vehicles. So this is not so here the car doesn't have to pay a price just through smarter design. Everybody gets a lot better in the process. Partial cappings, partial roofs, and taking space that is just buffer space today and integrating it as part of the urban metropolitan park system. So I'll conclude with, these examples give you an idea. This is the city as it is today. It already in this area here, it is already changing. Construction here is underway. And that's the systemic intervention over the entire system, building a park system of 15 kilometers, let's say about 9 miles, with the natural watering, with heat island reduction effects, with providing ample urban space and green space for residents, gigantic acoustic ameliorations and air quality improvements. So we think that this is an example of, at least our best example, of what a resilient systemic intervention can and should look like. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander. It really seems like these two interventions, both the story that Michiel told and your story, are really about the capacity of infrastructural intervention to improve the quality of life and to make cities more livable, more resilient, and more sustainable. I'd like to turn over the microphone to Lance, and we will take some questions. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm not sure that I see too many questions as yet in the chat. I see some good comments. What I would like to know, and this may be because of my experience or our experience here in the United States, especially in the Northeast, is to what extent or how, and I'm not sure this wasn't embedded in some of the presentation, the issues of political boundaries and interconnections that exist that underlie the larger scale projects and even some of the smaller scale Groningen projects where, you know, let's say in the city of New York, we have community planning boards. So you cross those borders, you cross voting barriers, you cross school districts. And if there's some comment that can be made about how one deals with the intersection of decision-making across political boundaries.
I think, Michiel, that probably is a question for you.
Hey, hello, good afternoon. What I think the way of dealing with political intersections and I think in Groningen it played a role, but I think especially also in the Antwerp project, I think maybe also Kobe can relate to that, because I think in Belgium the political kind of situation is more complex than I would say in the project that we have been working on in Groningen, where it's one government, is one city council who is actually kind of deciding and designing, making decisions on the steps to take. What we do see is that at least what happened in Groningen is that there is political support and also that there is a need for alignment between different political levels, so the national and the local levels. So that's also where we have used these projects to actually connect these agendas, to see how actually ambitions on mobility transformations can be connected to local policy planning and to implement them. So we actually see this strategic planning more as the bridge between these different political agendas and trying to find potential obstructions or conflict and to see how we can overcome them. But I think we've been in the project that we have shared, at least it was actually quite well, I would say that we were supported by the national policies and we had a very kind of progressive local government as well, so that really kind of worked well together. So I'm curious maybe to hear also in Antwerp if there were other strategies involved to deal with it.
Thanks very much, Michael, for that answer. I think there was a seed or a gem in the middle of it, which was the idea of using the project as the fulcrum for having issues surfaced, made transparent, and resolved. I think that's a very big issue. I think these things start with communication. And of course, if you do these in isolation and then deliver them as fait accompli, the idea of having acceptance probably reduces in terms of risk to zero. If you do it with the idea that it's an open conversation, which is what you're describing, even though it may be the small scale of Groningen or the larger scale, it still is of critical importance. So I think that's a great response to the question. There is one other question, or it wasn't put so much as a question, but a comment on the whole series of presentations, which I think is worth discussing, although again, it may be context related. You know, what we call the hinterland in the United States, with a vast continent of much undeveloped land, which we can call rural, if even that. The question of making connections, especially in our evolving sense of connectivity and interconnectedness between the natural and the man-made environment, the green and the brown, if you like, or whatever that may be. And what comes to my mind is, and I'll take a city like Salt Lake City in the United States as an example, of cities that have made very, very explicit attempts to literally intersect the city and the country. In Salt Lake City, if anyone doesn't know it, it's worth seeing or visiting. There is a wedge of the hinterland. I mean, a wedge of the wild hinterland that pokes into the city of Salt Lake City. So I have colleagues who live on that wedge, and they can look into there and they can see a cougar, they can see wild animals. There's a gateway in the city, towards the middle of the city. You go through that gateway and that becomes a portal to the hinterland, which they basically say means you don't have to get in your car and drive 2 hours to a national park to see the wilds. You can walk through. So, but that opens the conversation of the greening of the city. I'm not sure I will say the urbanization of the country. Again, I'm not sure if that's a matter of landscape, because in the Low Countries, I tend to think of it as one big urbanized region, but I may be wrong. So if you could talk about the intersection of the natural and the urban, and how, which you've done so beautifully in the neighborhoods, but at the next scale up, the regional scale.
Thank you for the question. I think what's interesting about that is that indeed this planning strategy of creating landscape corridors, which are actually going inside the urban environments. I think that's the way it's described in Salt Lake City. I mean, that's a brilliant way of leaving room for nature within the city. I think it's very important that it's not only kind of that's not the only way of kind of embedding the cities in the landscape. So actually the urban environment also needs to be kind of related to these landscape qualities, and I think that's quite interesting to reflect on the difference also between Belgium and the Netherlands, where in the Netherlands actually urban environments tend to have very strict boundaries. There is a very strict division between the countryside and the cities. So you can really, well, you are in an urban environment, and then you can go out, and then you're in the rural areas. Whereas in Belgium, you have these boundaries. They are not so strict. So you have a very big hinterland where this where landscape and urban or the rural landscape and the urban environment actually merge. And so these are quite different conditions. And what actually is important, or at least what we think is important in both conditions, that the landscape of the rural landscape and an urban landscape, that they are not two separate entities, but that we try to bring them together, and then not necessarily in the way that it's done in the hinterlands of the Belgian cities, but that we try to kind of, because there you can see that often the urbanization and the green landscape, they do not necessarily create specific spatial qualities. I think what we need to try to move to is that this kind of integration of these two creates qualitative spaces, and that can be done on various scales. The fact that indeed you have green corridors of pure ecological landscapes within an urban environment, so that the proximity to these landscapes is there. That also creates the opportunity to relate all the other ambient urban environments to that. So, but it's important that parks, streetscapes, all the different spatial components of an urban environment are actually also related to these green landscapes that are surrounding the city. So it's not only surrounding or kind of going into the city with a kind of a green corridor, but all the spatial elements of the city should also relate to that in a certain way.
Thank you very much. Also, a good discussion, and one probably that's going to remain, I think, open-ended, because when we're in this era of increasing urbanization, and this pressure between urban and rural, or brown and green, or whatever we want to call it, is a question that will continue to advance, especially with our concern about climate change and biodiversity. There are so many issues connected to this. So I really, really greatly appreciate, actually, I have to say, both of these presentations were excellent. They raised so many good points, both from the implementable, pragmatic, to, I must say, the utopian, fantastical. I mean, in certain ways, I know that, I worked for some time looking at the Cross Bronx Expressway, and I look at the degree of creativity we could bring to bear in that political landscape against the Antwerp Ring Road. And I can only hope that that extent of imagination is floated to pressure the decision-making towards something that's more positive. We're running close to a quarter of an hour past the time, and I know that many of our attendees tend to budget their time tightly. And so in fairness to them, I think I want to say a big thank you to Nadia and to all of you who've spoken, because I think it has been an absolutely excellent program, beautifully presented, work beautifully rendered and communicated. And so I think we've been privileged to see it delivered. I, for one, look forward to following up and keeping abreast, as well as sharing what I've heard with others who I know can benefit from the methodology and the knowledge you've created. So a heartfelt thanks for your generosity. We hope to stay in touch. I think I'll give the final word to Nadia, who's been such a champion in this program.
I would just love to thank you again for the invitation, and also express our sincere wish to, continue sharing and exchanging ideas, and maybe doing something together with all of you in the spirit of advancing resilience and knowledge sharing and learning from each other. I very much hope to see you all in person, and I want to thank Michiel and Alexander and Kobe and our respective teams for the support, and very much hope that this is to be continued.
Okay.
And wishing everybody a good day, good evening.
I will give a last comment. My last comment is in the Green Cities series on May 4th. If you look at our website, we will have a presentation from a progressive city in Turkey. I think from the description of the program, I think it will be an absolutely wonderful segue from what we heard today to what we heard in an even slightly more localized sense. So please join us. And for the CSU, on May 18th, we have our partnership program with UN Habitat, our flagship program on cities and climate change. Please again, tune into the website and you'll find more information. Thank you, Nadia. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.